Good afternoon, everyone.
50 years or so. That's when I really became worried about my business. Started
Good afternoon.
making sense
Welcome.
of what I was seeing.
Welcome to our Express Session event on affordable housing. I've been saying to some people today that no matter what event we try to have here, affordable housing comes up. It's going across every category: parking, traffic. Our arts and culture conversation turned into a talk about affordable housing. So we're excited to be here today and to further this along. We actually started our series last year. The first event was affordable housing. A lot of these same people who were here with us, so we've invited them back a year later to see what kind of progress has been made. I want to thank the American Hotel, Ted, Mary, Julian, Chef Jonathan, your entire team for hosting us and making these conversations possible for us. Thank you. A couple things to note. 2 weeks from now, we're hosting a special event, an Express Sessions event, on the future of Main Street and the business district here in Sag Harbor. We're going to have a section next week that's hopefully going to kind of set the stage for that. It's a conversation that dominates a lot of things in Sag Harbor right now. So I definitely encourage you all to come on out for that. It's $10 per person to help us with the production, and it's going to be March 7th at Bay Street Theater. We're also going to be back here on March 22nd, and that topic is going to be land use and preservation, and that's another one that kind of pervades a lot of what we talk about on a daily basis. We really wouldn't be able to do a lot of this stuff without the help of some sponsors. So I'd like to just take a quick minute to thank them. For today's event specifically, the Sag Harbor Partnership came on as a sponsor since it's one of its missions to support the development of affordable housing in Sag Harbor. April Gornick is here with us today, who's an important member of the partnership. And Susan Mead, who's also a board member and is well-versed in a lot of different things. I've had some great talks with her. The partnership, of course, is better known for a little project they're working on across the street, rebuilding the Sag Harbor Cinema Arts Center, but affordable housing, again, is also something that's important to them. So thank you very much to the partnership. Other sponsors who've helped produce this series, the Sag Harbor Chamber of Commerce, which is represented with a table of business leaders here today. The Sag Harbor Variety Store, Lisa is here and has been incredibly supportive of us. The Lofts, John Leonard, Saybrook Capital, BNB Bank, and Otera Fordham is here today. The Washwick Agency, Dayton Ritz and Osborne, Adam Miller, and Burke and Sullivan, Attorneys at Law, JCP Landscaping, Save Sag Harbor, Peak Savers, Fisher's Home Furnishings, the Lofts of Tiffany Scarlato, and the Sag Harbor Inn. And lastly, I want to thank the good folks at LTV who have been filming these sessions for us and are very supportive. Thank you all very much. So now I'd like to get on to the topic. As I mentioned, we started with this last year and we wanted to revisit it because so much has been done in the last 12 months in both East Hampton and Southampton towns, including the adoption of legislation aimed at increasing the stock of affordable apartments in Southampton, and the purchase of land for affordable housing in Wainscott, which is just down the street here on Route 114, by officials in East Hampton town. For those of us who live and work on the South Fork, the lack of affordable housing options for year-round residents, our workforce, volunteers, has the potential to have a dire impact on our economy. Balancing quality of life and our rural aesthetic with our housing needs has never felt more challenging. And yet, it seems that more than ever, more residents and government leaders understand that if we are going to preserve our way of life, that includes doing what we can to ensure the South Fork of Long Island does not become solely a resort town, but a place where families and a workforce can thrive year-round. So how do we accomplish this? The answers are not easy, and which is why we've brought some of these people here today. We have East Hampton Town Supervisor Peter Van Scoyoc. East Hampton Town's Housing Authority Director Katie Casey. Rob Calvert, who is a director with the Sag Harbor Community Housing Trust. Diane Weir, who's the director of Southampton Town's Office of Housing and Community Development. New York State Assemblyman Fred Thiele. Michael Daly, who's a member of the Progressive East End Reformers, the Next Gen Housing Collaborative, and also a founder of the group East End YIMBY, which of course stands for Yes in My Backyard. And as I mentioned earlier, Susan Mead, who is a board member with the Sag Harbor Partnership and brings a lot of knowledge about community development to the table. As a means of introduction, I'm going to ask the panel members a question, and which will follow with some questions and comments from all of you. Brian Boyhan, my partner at the Express, will take over that portion, and we just ask you to speak into the microphone and introduce yourself, and please keep your comments brief and to the point. Peter, we'll start with you. The town of East Hampton recently purchased just under 4 acres of land outside of Sag Harbor Village that has been earmarked for affordable housing. The properties sit next to a parcel owned by the Sag Harbor Community Housing Trust, also earmarked for affordable housing. What kind of opportunity exists for the town to partner with a nonprofit in this effort, and what kind of housing projects do you envision for the property?
Well, as you stated, the East Hampton town has recently purchased property. It was the former Triune Baptist Church future site of that church, which didn't come to fruition. And the housing trust from Sag Harbor, Rob Calvert, and I met last year after this session. We talked about ways that we could collaborate together. And it just so turned out that this property became available. We thought that there were synergies, and we believe that there's a way to collaborate going forward with both of those properties. And it's a very promising new project that we'll be moving forward on.
Okay, thank you. Katie, it's been a big year for affordable housing in East Hampton. The Housing Authority is working on a new affordable housing project in Amagansett. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and when you hope to see it groundbreaking?
Yes, thank you for the question. I'm always happy to talk about my project. 37 units of multifamily housing, 1, 2, 3 bedrooms and 1 4-bedroom, mixed income, transit oriented. That's a lot of jargon, but it's right on the edge of the Amagansett Main Street downtown. It's less than a 5-minute walk to the train station. There are plenty of museums. You can walk to the beach. It's on a bus line. It has a lot of things going for this particular site. So in preparation for today, I watched last year's talk and what a difference a year makes. 2 months after last year's Express sessions, we were notified by the state that the project was funded. So full steam ahead with all of the compliance studies, environmental reviews, soil testing, water pressure, community capacity to serve the residents in that location, including emergency services personnel. So many pieces go into getting a project across the finish line. So last year when I sat on this dais, it was still unsure whether the project was going to be funded and completed. And yesterday and today we're closing on the second phase of a big financial transaction. The first was to issue the bans to acquire the property in 2016. Today we are redeeming those bans, and we're moving into the construction financing phase. And then approximately 12 to 14 months from now, we will be converting, per se, in conversion to permanent financing. So that project, I expect, will be up and running, fully occupied in probably a year and a half.
Wow. Thank you. Rob, your nonprofit group, as we mentioned, has been working to build an affordable, sustainable project for a number of years on Route 114. What are some of the challenges the group has faced, and what does the future hold now that the town of East Hampton has bought the adjacent 4-acre parcel?
Thanks, Kevin, for the question. Thank you for hosting this event and reminding us all of the importance of affordable housing. At the micro level, the challenge that we had was to create an organization from scratch that had the capacity to build that which you described. Those challenges did not seem to be insurmountable for us. They were very manageable. We were able to secure the property, and if anyone is involved in effort to build affordable housing, land acquisition is critical. We were able to preserve 8 affordable units, which is another problem that's underappreciated in our community, and that is the loss of existing affordable housing. We were able to come up with what we thought was a model that could be replicated, that was sustainable, that could be used as a guide for how we would go forward. What we could not solve after 3 unsuccessful finance applications, which included simultaneously at the same time that East Hampton was trying to secure its financing, is a very competitive situation where we just could not compete at the scale of the project that we were working on. And it was that realization that as a small organization, it's volunteer-based, however dedicated we are to affordable housing, there are limits to what we can accomplish, which is why that we felt it was necessary to build a coalition, if you will, of like-minded people that would achieve that. At the macro level, we were facing a choice as a community. It is to whether we're going to outsource our community or we're going to build it from within. And so any conversation about affordable housing asks much bigger questions. Are we going to outsource are we going to export our kids and import our labor and build part-time homes, luxury homes, that enable us to retire elsewhere to some other state to an affordable house? So it's really, as important as the subject is for all of us, there are really 2 choices. Do we maintain or prop up a outsourced community, as you described in your introduction, or are we willing to build in a much more comprehensive way a community that's as built from within as it has historically done?
All right, thank you.
That was well said.
Diana, a lot has been happening in Southampton as well. The town board recently approved a measure that allows for the construction of affordable accessory apartments in less densely populated areas. How important will it be for the towns and villages to start looking at apartment housing for its year-round residents and workforce, as well as single-family homes?
It's something that the communities have struggled with for years, allowing apartments. That was always something, we don't want apartments, that's a transient population. But you start to realize we need apartments, we need rentals. Everybody would love to own a home. Some people shouldn't own a home, can't own a home, can't afford a home. So I think we struggled with the legislation for over a year, massaging it many different ways, so we thought it would be acceptable without creating density in areas that are already dense. So I've even brought the list, the places where the housing will not be allowed is a lot less. So I'll give you those communities: Remsenburg, Riverside, West Hampton Beach, Hampton Bays, and Shinnecock Hills. Those are the communities where this legislation will not allow at this time. So what we did was we looked at the CDPs from the Census Bureau, which could community designated places, and looked at the statistics of density. And anything that had 500 or more as a dense population, we said no. So every 10 years we will look at it again, but it kind of fits with the way the community is at this point. So the town already had an existing accessory apartment code. We currently have about 300 apartments, but those are not subject to any regulations except that they must be owner occupied and cannot be rented in the summer. But it doesn't really solve the problem that we have, because they can rent it at whatever rental amount they want. So we have put a cap on the rental as a fair market rent for these units. They're allowed to be 1 and 2 bedrooms only, so hopefully they won't impact the school district. They have to comply with all the code, parking and all the different things that we have to comply with, setbacks if you want to build it outside. But it will allow any person who now wants to build an affordable or accessory apartment used to have a 30,000 square foot lot, basically 3/4 of an acre. We dropped that to 20,000, to allow this, but in replacement for that, they have to be in our affordable program. So we'll see how that works. Hopefully a lot of people will do that. We don't require the owner to live in the main home. The owner can live in either. So if you're a senior and you want to live in the apartment and rent the house because that's more beneficial and you don't need the space, we allow that. Today we were reviewing legislature from the county that is also going to propose keeping their units that they support with funding affordable in perpetuity. We've been doing that in the town for about 10 years. But over the last 8 years, nothing had happened because the economy was bad, the banks weren't lending. Now we see a pop-up. We just sold 2 beautiful homes in Tuckahoe on North McGee. 2 local people ended up, we had 272 people in the lottery for 2 homes. So that tells you where the need is. We did pull the lottery, they went through the process, got there, and now we have 15 condo units at Southampton Point, you know, the gray buildings down there in the Tuckahoe area as well, and we had about 280 applicants for those. So right now, they're down to about number 60 on the list of 270, and about 3 people have qualified. So at least we're providing more than we had in the past. Over the years, from the 1990s, maybe 1988, Southampton built about 300 units of affordable housing. And that was through its own code, 25% affordable, you know, different reasons, density incentives to developers. We lost some because they went to the market before we placed our code. But now we have about 300 in the pipeline just in the past few years. And that includes Scoyoc and Sandy Hollow apartments that are also like the ones in Amagansett. So we're seeing a lot of progress because developers are building again, so we're getting 5 units here, 3 units there, and every unit is gold, so.
And just for reference, what's the number for the rental on the 1 and 2 bedroom apartments that people are going to be building?
The one bedroom probably about 1,000, 1,100, and the 2 bedroom maybe 1,200, 1,300. I mean, the fair market rent set by HUD, so it's very easy to go online and say, okay, this is the rent that I have to charge. So we're very excited with the town.
Okay, thank you. Right, you have introduced legislation that would create a new transfer tax, similar to the Community Preservation Fund, to aid East End towns in financing affordable and workforce housing projects. Do you think this year it has a chance of being seriously considered?
Well, this is the first year we've seriously put it forward to be considered. So, you know, the idea of a dedicated fund for affordable housing that kind of would have been the twin of the Community Preservation Fund is something that's been talked about for a long time. The fact of the matter is that the projects that you're hearing talked about here today, you know, whether they're not-for-profit or the towns or wherever they come from, they're all great projects. There just aren't enough of them, and there aren't enough resources to do more of them. Imagine if we had left all of our open space preservation efforts and farmland preservation efforts to depend on state grants like we do for housing. And you know, it's a finite amount of money. We have to compete for those state grants with you know, communities that, you know, have far lower incomes, et cetera. Amagansett, you know, they didn't get the grant for that the first time that they applied. So, you know, those grants are always great, and Southampton's benefited from them, and East Hampton has, but it isn't enough. So, you know, it's going to take money, and, you know, just to kind of outline how this would work, and that will help me to answer your question as to what the chances are for passage, is that, you know, we had looked at a community housing fund for a while. The question was, how are we going to finance it? You know, we looked at things such as a McMansion tax, an increased fee on luxury homes, and that was not very popular. People don't want, you know, they certainly don't want property tax increases. They don't want to increase the sales tax. You know, nobody likes increases in taxes, and that will be certainly an issue with this particular legislation. But if you ever saw the movie Argo, where they, you know, they were trying to extricate the Americans that were in the Canadian embassy, and they came in with this idea, and they said, you know, is that the best bad idea you have? And they said, yeah, it's the best bad idea we have to get them out. Well, that's what the transfer tax is. It's the best bad idea. Of all the taxes and revenues that are possible out there, people are accustomed to the transfer tax with the Community Preservation Fund. So how this would work is that it would be a dedicated fund, just like the Community Preservation Fund is. It would be separate from the Community Preservation Fund. We're not adding another purpose to the Community Preservation Fund. This is separate. It just happens to have the same source of funding. And, after meeting with stakeholders all over the East End, the purposes of the fund, financial assistance to first-time home buyers, public-private partnerships with regard to housing projects like you're hearing about here today, acquisition of land, construction of housing for home ownership, also for rentals, all of the things, the whole litany of possible projects would be part of this. It would be funded by a 0.5%, an additional 0.5% on the transfer tax. At the same time, this legislation would also increase the exemption amount that exists for the entire transfer tax. Right now, it's $250,000. People ask, well, why is it $250,000? Well, because in 1998, when we passed the Community Preservation Fund, $250,000 was the median cost of housing on the East End. And we didn't want to impact affordable and moderate income housing, so we exempted that at $250,000. It hasn't been changed in 20 years. We're proposing to at least increase it to $400,000 from $250,000. Now that isn't the median cost of housing out here either. But by increasing it to $400,000, first of all, it's less of an impact. I think it helps the real estate industry, the builders who might be somewhat leery about this. That across the board we're increasing the amount to $400,000. What that means is that for a house of right now of $1 million or less. If you're buying a house that's $1 million or less, you would pay less under this new law than you pay now with the exemption only at $250,000. So the idea is it would actually be, this is the reverse of the Trump tax bill. This provides actually a cut for housing under $1 million, and affordable housing, it would be funded by the high end of the market. That's how this would work. So it would generate about $20 million a year across the 5 East End towns. 90% of that gets generated in Southampton and East End. So what does that mean as far as what are the chances of passage? Well, there's broad-based support for this. The towns like it. It seems popular regardless of political stripe. As usual, there is some resistance from the building industry and from the real estate industry, just as there was with the Community Preservation Fund. We will try to work through that. It is a tax, which also makes it somewhat difficult, but it's a tax, like the Community Preservation Fund, that the voters will have to vote to impose upon themselves. It's subject to a mandatory referendum. The concerns that I have for it, I'm optimistic about this bill. The concerns I have are as follows. The climate that we're entering into right now in 2019, the impact, I mentioned the federal tax bill, the loss of the state and local tax deductibility, the cap at $10,000, the SALT, so-called SALT. There's the concern about what impacts, people are just learning the impacts of that as they do their taxes for 2019. So there's some concern about what impact that is going to have. So we'll have to deal with that. But I'm optimistic. I think there's broad-based support locally. Senator Laval will be sponsoring it in the Senate. And I do remind people that, people always talk about the Community Preservation Fund and how well it works. And I remind them that it's an overnight success that took like 12 years to get adopted. We first tried the Community Preservation Fund in the 1980s, and if you remember, the stock market went boom, went crash in like 1987. We couldn't come back until like 7 or 8 years later. So the state does have a has its own shortfall in tax revenues, and so all of these things, there's some uncertainty about the economy and all that, which I think we'll have to deal with, but overall I'm optimistic.
Okay, thank you. Michael, you wear many hats in the community, but focusing in on one of them, can you update us on the progress made this year by the New Gen Housing Collaborative?
Well, our progress is really about getting our mind around all the complex issues around affordable housing. Rob sits on that committee with me, and there may be one or two other people in the room. And we're really in kind of fact-finding because we have a simple solution to a complex problem. And the simple solution is to provide housing for everybody in the community. And that's all we have to do. Because everyone deserves to have a place to live that they can afford to live in. But the complexity around that is the fact that affordable housing in and of itself is really, it's a moral problem as well as a marketing problem, because affordable housing is a lightning bolt. It's a lightning rod for people to respond and react to the terms of affordable housing. People associate affordable housing with people who are less than them. They associate affordable housing with either poor white people or people of color. And, this is the fabulous Hamptons. I mean, we don't have those people here. Well, we're building ourselves into the Disneyfication of the Hamptons, where we're just going to have security guards here at night, and all the employees are going to be let in every morning to come and do their jobs and then go home at night, But it's a real moral issue, the fact that we have elected several of these fine people that sit up on this dais today. And then we just say, okay, yeah, they said they'll do affordable housing, I'm gonna go home and watch Netflix. And who comes to these meetings around affordable housing are the NIMBYs. The NIMBYs are the not in my backyarders. And the other people that come to these meetings are the cave people. Does anybody know who a cave person is?
No.
You do, because I told you. Cave person is a citizen against virtually everything.
Oh, right.
And we all know cave people and NIMBYs. And, it's a natural human reaction to be concerned about the value of your home, or about the safety of your children, or about things of that nature. But we have gotten so negative about affordable housing that we're now in a crisis. And some of the politicians even agree we're in a crisis mode. But when they go to meetings and you have people, that the cave people and the NIMBYs will come to the meetings because they're scared to death to have something near their house. How about the lady who said, they're gonna crawl over the fence and swim in my pool? Okay? And that one thing that we had. Well, the room went dead, and so did the project. How about the nice man in west of here that said, I'm just afraid of all those little Latino children in that hotel there because it's not safe. It's not safe for them, you know what I mean? I'm really concerned about them. Crying crocodile tears. I also look at affordable housing kind of as the bad versus the sad. Look at crack cocaine, okay? When people were doing crack cocaine, who was doing crack cocaine? And that's bad, lock them up. But now we have an opioid epidemic, okay? And who's doing opioids? A higher level of people. So that problem is a sad problem. That's not a bad problem, that's a sad problem. So the racial and the generous and the support that we give around affordable housing has got to change. And we can't elect these fine people and then just let them hang out to dry. We have to go and we have to support them at these meetings. And we have to go to meetings and we have to speak up for affordable housing, workforce housing, senior housing. We have to stand up and speak. If it's to be, it's up to we. And things only happen when the people get behind it. You know, but then you go to a town board meeting about banning straws and it's like watching an episode of The Love Boat. Right? We're wonderful to our piping plovers. We're wonderful to the turtles. I mean, no, you can't put sidewalks up on the road there because for the children to be able to walk to school because the turtles won't be able to get across the road. But these sidewalks are for the children so that they can walk to school. As my mom would say, Michael, you're in a pickle. Well, folks, we're in a pickle. And there's varying estimates. We have so few true facts. We have a lot of anecdotal information about how many units we need on the South Fork even. Some say we need 7,500 units in Southampton and East Hampton. Others say, well, you know, 3,500 would help. All these projects of 28, 29, 30 are helpful. The legislation that's been done has been done because that's the most that they feel they can get away with because the NIMBYs and the cave people are coming screaming and yelling. Diana, how many years did it take to get Scoyoc and Sandy Hollow? Was it 10?
It usually takes about 8 to 10 years for basically almost all affordable housing projects to fight the lawsuits. And there's funding, you know, because people, but then there's always a lawsuit and that takes another 2 or 3 years. So it's usually about 10 years, 8 to 10 years.
So about 10 years it took to get 62 units. So at that rate, it's going to, you know, we're not going to be here when we get even a third of the number of units that we need. And our children are leaving, even we're leaving. Everyone in this room, I would imagine, knows somebody who could benefit from attainable housing, workforce housing, senior housing. All of us, we wanted these great private homes, and then some of us have lost our spouses, and then we're alone in those homes. And we can't walk to the village, and we stop driving. We need affordable, attainable workforce and senior housing, and it's not going to happen without us getting involved, getting out of our feety pajamas, turning off Netflix, and attending these meetings and supporting the people that we've elected because they want to do the right thing for their community. I'm going to be holding a affordable housing advocacy training program either late March or early April. And it'll be announced on the East End YIMBY Facebook page. So, and there's a lot of information. It's basically a curated site where I put articles on there that are relevant to affordable housing, good ideas and sad ideas. And so there's a piece of paper on it at the front, but if you go to the East End YIMBY Facebook page, you'll stay up to date on that meeting and other things that are coming up. But please, be a YIMBY.
Thank you, Michael. Susan, I mentioned that the Sag Harbor Partnership has been involved in a number of projects, including, of course, the purchase of the Sag Harbor Cinema property to protect and preserve and enhance Greater Sag Harbor. Has the nonprofit discussed affordable housing and ways it could help deal with the crisis issue on the South Fork?
First of all, it's in our mission statement, and that's about the extent of our involvement. But we have discussed it, and as soon as the little project across the street is finished, I, for one, would be very interested in volunteering for some activities to encourage affordable housing. My background is such that, and I'm going to support everything everybody said on this panel, and thank you very much for putting this together because we think it's an extremely important social, economic issue and sustainability issue for the village. The incentives that have to be established for affordable housing, whether it's tax incentives, which Fred has addressed in a very cohesive way, or it's regulatory incentives. It's not one thing, it's a list of 20 or 30 things. We worked on projects that had 15 different levels of incentives. And it often took 5, 6, 7, 8 years to put them together. So it's a long-term situation, and it takes tremendous patience. But to be able to go to a town or a village and want to put in an affordable apartment, building permit fees need to be waived, regulatory changes need to be easy and inexpensive, consultant fees need to be waived. There's a whole series of, and those are all incentives, and they add up. I can say that the former mayor of Sag Harbor, Greg Flores, oversaw the code changes. We have an affordable unit provision in our code that is little used in Sag Harbor. It is expensive to implement it in Sag Harbor. There are some density issues related to it, but it's time to revisit it and to make it work, because currently it's not producing a lot of affordable units. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Susan. We'd like to hear from you guys who are attending here today with questions, comments, and I'm going to turn this portion over to Brian.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you to our panel for joining us. I see we have a number of regular visitors, return guests, and it's great to have a little community of people who want to come up and listen to these. Let's start with questions. I thought I saw somebody's hand up. Just speak into the mic and tell us who you are.
Hi, Eva Growney. I'm a local architect, and I know almost everybody on the panel. Good work, been going on. My question, I had a couple of questions quickly. One has to do with, do these new housing projects that are being built have, are they going to have their own sanitary systems? Because that's really a critical factor, especially since nowadays a lot of construction is happening on houses that are being renovated or additions or new, are having to comply with the new code, which is a $30,000 nut for the individual. That's one. Two, I think there is not enough focus on allowing people to stay in their homes and have access to rentable spaces. And granted, they need to be upgraded so that they are compliant with all the state codes and all the national code, basically. And so I think that there needs to be much more attention given to that topic, because that means we're not building much anymore. In most cases, we're only letting people turn an unused room into a usable space. And it's less building, it's less footprint on the general area out here, which is, I think, a very critical thing as an architect. And the third thing, I just want to know what kind of, Michael, you brought up so many good points, and I really applaud you and thank you for all your efforts. I know you work closely. So I want to say thanks to you, and also this lovely lady who I'm blocking, Diana Weir, I know has worked on very hard on this for decades. So anything that I can talk with you about, Diana, I'm happy to sit down and talk with you. And thank you, Fred.
Thanks, Eva. So I think maybe Diane and Katie could take that first part of that question.
Thank you.
So the Suffolk County rules all new development, and what their requirements are is what the towns usually comply with. In Southampton, we are requiring the IA systems, the new IA nitrogen reducing systems, and we're using the CPF fund, which Fred passed legislation to allow part of the fund now to be used for water protection. And we are giving grants to any person who wants to change or upgrade depending on the water zone that they're in. It's a little, finite, but that's what they're doing. The town already waives all permits, fees for any affordable housing. So the towns have already done that, at least we do in Southampton, so.
Katie?
Yeah, for our Amagansett project, we could have developed the 37 units as of right, because the application went in before Town of East Hampton put into place January of this year. The water quality protections where significant alterations and new construction have to have an advanced system. But I like to think we were looking forward, and with the help of the county infrastructure funds, we are doing advanced wastewater treatment at Amagansett. We
Okay.
proactively put that in place. Now it is law, but.
I will say in regards to the project on 114, we originally took on it and said that even though we had by right 8 certificates of occupancy, we would not develop that property if we were to exceed what would be our discharge from 2 houses on the 2-acre site. So we were already committed to innovative and alternative wastewater treatment before it was even imposed as the rule. And so we were fighting an uphill battle, but we did not expect to do the project as of right. As far as the larger project is concerned, the first thing we did was to recognize it was going to require an on-site wastewater treatment plant. That's about a $900,000 hit. And it has excess capacity beyond the immediate neighborhood or beyond our immediate site. So we engineered it as the first question to answer as to the feasibility of this project because of where it is in the configuration of the site. So these issues are front and center.
Thanks. The second part of that question, I believe, had to do with finding ways to encourage people to stay in their houses. Is that correct, Ava?
Yes, thank you.
Great. I just want to add on to the last question really quickly. Any future development of affordable housing in East Hampton will meet the standards of renewable energy, the home energy use standards, as well as septic. That's just going to be part of what we do going forward because it's critical across the board. With regard to being able to stay in your home, the town, and I believe Southampton also has this, we have accessory affordable apartments. We've expanded that to include accessory apartments of garages and detached buildings of 20,000 square foot or more, and a standalone cottage on 1 acre or more. So that those structures could be either occupied by the homeowner or by someone who's seeking affordable housing. And I think we know that people more and more want to be able to age in place. I think it's important that we find ways to keep people within our community because that is the fabric of our community, our shared values, small town living, our EMS, fire departments are filled with volunteers, the ability of businesses and municipal governments as well to hire and retain staff is critical. We struggle with that every single day with the long commute times. And I just want to give a shout out to Fred on the South Fork commuter connection, which will start March 4th. And that will help alleviate some of the problems that we have, but it's so much better if we can keep that money and those people in our community to be involved and engaged. I think it's critical. The historical context of our town, we have people who've lived here for 14 generations, and we have descendants from the indigenous people when the settlers first arrived. We're still in our town. This is a remarkable place to live. I think going forward, and again, a shout out to Fred for the transfer tax, because I think one of the things we struggle with
Checks in the mail.
is funding. Well, it's an election year, I'm looking for their endorsement. Just kidding on that, but seriously, that's another way that municipal governments will be able to acquire property, because funding is a crucial portion of this component. And currently we have to use general municipal funds. We have to bond or take money out of surplus if we're fortunate enough to have it. And frankly, East Hampton is in pretty good shape right now, and that's an option for us. And we're constantly looking for additional properties to buy and develop for affordable housing. Right now, we have 12 units that will come online. We're in the final permanent inspection stages. Katie mentioned the 37 units. We expect between 25 and 35 units on 114, but again, people want to be able to age in place, they want to be able to stay in the community, and we're going to continue to look at opportunities to do that.
Thank you, Peter. And Eva, you had a third part to your question.
Well, okay, but before I get into that, because there's an issue, excuse me, there's an issue, oh, sorry. All right, there's an
Here,
issue, all right, thank you. There's an issue with people staying in place, being able to rent the spaces to a number that works for them and that is not under the scrutiny of any governing force. And that, I think, is a real problem because, you know, in certain circumstances, because you are getting other subsidies, I understand that there have to be regulations. But when there is no subsidy, and one person wants to rent a room for $400, and let's say the same qualified room, somebody else is renting for $800. I think it's not fair that the government get in the pocket or in the knowledge base of the pocket of the person that's renting the space. It's really, everybody has a different need, everybody has a different way of renting out spaces, and I think that that's a topic that's going to be really hotly discussed. I know it was discussed in the last year's meeting, and it gets into the Airbnb is one faction of that, which I didn't mention, so I'm sorry. But Airbnb is one faction of that, and there's a lot of hubbub about, you know, not allowing Airbnb, and I think that that's a very slippery slope. So I hope there's going to be some discussion about, you know, taking a hard look at that in a way that's workable for this community, not somebody's concept of what it should be. And not about just numbers. It's got to be about what Michael said. It's a humane issue here. It's a people who cannot afford to live where they're living and want to stay and should be able to stay, as you so rightly said. And that's really a big factor here.
So
Eva, I just want to add that the town actually allows up to two rooms in a house to be rented out in an owner-occupied situation at any rate. It could be a market rate.
Yeah, and you can do that now in Southampton as well. You can have 5 unrelated people living in a home as long as they live as a family. 1 kitchen, you know, 1 living space. So that's allowed right now that's the golden girl thing I call it, because I always said that. I need 3 friends to come in and we can afford anything. You know, any ladies gray haired up here. So, I mean, that's something that is very acceptable. So you have a teacher or a retired senior or a widow that you can do that right now. With the affordable accessory apartment laws, if you're going to build now. Right. And that has to deal with town codes as well. And then we want to make sure that that's going to go to an affordable person, not to an Airbnb situation, because that doesn't help our workforce here. And that's the issue. And that Airbnb is being debated right now in both towns. That's a transient population. What we're talking about with the accessory apartments is affordable year-round rentals, not summer rentals, not transient rentals, for our workforce and our families here. So there's a little bit of a difference, and that's why we have to monitor it, so.
I would also like to add, how does one age in place? In order to age in place, you likely need a caregiver. And where does,
No.
eventually
Not
at some
necessarily.
point.
No, not necessarily.
We have a question right here also.
Nancy, I'm not a question.
Thank you very much.
My name is Dr. Nancy Peppard. I'm a forensic gerontologist. For those of you who don't know what gerontology is, think geriatrics, think yourself. Aging in place is simply wanting to stay in your own home until you expire.
Period.
Period, actually. It's not any extraordinary thing, but the fact is we don't have the services here. So I'm the executive director of Audi's Neighborhood Network. We're designed as part of the village movement across the United States. Michael Daly helped me put this together. And the whole goal of this is to help our seniors in all of the Hamptons. It's all 5 townships on the East End, both Forks and Shelter Island, so that they can age in place, so they can have socialization activities, they can have transportation, which is volunteer transportation, they can have handymen come to their homes who actually answer a call and come. The things that are not available now. And the other thing I think is reframing this question about affordable housing. On the east end of Long Island and throughout the United States, it seems, it's not just affordable housing, it's affordable living. If you haven't noticed, the gas on the North Fork is cheaper than it is on the South Fork. and it's the same distance to deliver.
Right.
It's at $2.19 in Smithtown, where I go regularly to get gas. It costs me $25 to go get that. But there's also Trader Joe's.
Nancy, you actually,
But affordable living, Katie, in my idea, in an architect's vision perhaps, when you're designing these housing units, like the one on Accabonac right now, it's just houses and they happen to be within walking distance, but not within walking distance for seniors or people who are disabled. And to design with new coding, housing that actually has stores underneath it, where the rents in the stores keep the products being sold at a rate that local people can afford it, not multimillionaires.
Thank you very much.
And if you look in East Hampton, and now Sag Harbor's starting to go that way, all the stores in East Hampton are essentially closed. When I was a kid, they were all open all year round for anybody to go into and shop. You're getting my message, so.
Nancy, you actually went in the direction I was headed. By caregiver, I meant services, not necessarily a live-in nurse or aide, but in order to age in place with dignity and to be comfortable, at some point you're gonna need services. You'll need the bus driver. You might need grocery delivery. Once a week, human services person to come in and help you do heavy lifting. Can you open your windows in springtime, or do you need somebody to come and open those heavy double hungs? Exactly. So who are the people that provide those services, and where do they live, and how much money do they earn?
Well,
That's where I was going.
Audie's neighborhood network is for senior to senior type of help. So they actually live here in the community. And again, it's all 5 townships.
Thank you.
When you were talking, I'm Ann Lieber with the Custom House Museum, and when you were talking, it reminded me of the little tiny houses that are being built on lots, and they sound very good, you know, very, very tiny, that either the owner could move into and rent out their main house or vice versa. But the lots in Sag Harbor are not that big, most of them. And is there some consideration on changing the regulations so that they don't have to be that large to get one of these little tiny, and I think these little tiny houses, I'm not sure how, they collect the waste themselves and, you know, it collects and it doesn't use the sewer system. So, yeah.
Any response to that from our panel?
Well, I have a response.
Okay.
I think it would be the density, no, I don't think so, but the density issue in Sag Harbor is unique because the lots are small, they're close together, and the opportunity to have an accessory building in the backyard, and excuse my accent, is something that is fought vigorously. And that's one of the things we have to look at in our code, which is different than Southampton and East Hampton. No fees are waived when you apply for affordable housing here. And the ability to get an accessory building becomes a larger issue than perhaps it should. And that's, in terms of the Sag Harbor issue, these small, wonderful little houses they are doing now is something that they could fit quite nicely in a historic district if a reasonable group of people would get together. So I don't think it's out of the question, it's just revisiting our code.
Well, thanks. And Rob?
Yes, in 2008, the village passed a comprehensive plan, and one of the things it attempted to do, or at least it recognized, was the conversion of older houses that were essentially board owned into single-family houses. So they were hoping to arrest that. Whether we're talking about a density or a place like Sag Harbor, or we're talking about the larger homes that are in more suburban areas, I think we can anticipate there's going to be some change in the economics and the practicality of operating and owning those homes. So let's just build into it. Let's recognize that that's going to happen and permit a certain number of conversions per year in which the use goes back to multifamily. I think that's a practical way of taking the larger housing stock that we have, even in a place like Sag Harbor where the lots are small, or wherever there's a large house, to recognize that the capacity to handle the waste is already in place.
That's
And the capacity to handle the bedrooms is already in place. So rather than to build more housing, just recognize that those conversions need to happen, make them legal, facilitate them now, and have a certain percentage that you're allowed to be reconverted in every year to a multifamily house.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Rob.
My house at one time used to have 3 units in the Depression. Then it went to 2, then it went to 1. And it would be lovely to be able to take it back to 3 if necessary.
Yeah, there are many, when I first came to town, there were many, many houses in the village, these big old houses where there were 4 or 5 apartments, and for young people who were moving out of their house for the first time, this was their first stop, you know, and we have eliminated all of that in Sag Harbor. Eleni, you have a question?
Brian, just Eleni, before you go, I just wanted to add to that, and that is that another 4-letter word in our lovely East End is density. People equate density with damaging water quality, and part of that is because the Suffolk County Board of Health limits the type of systems that we can use for waste treatment. We need to expand that. We need to put pressure on the county to help expand the type of waste treatment equipment that's available to us. You notice how Sag Harbor is a vibrant downtown because it has a sewer district in Sag Harbor, so that allows us to have apartments above the stores. East Hampton Village, Bridgehampton Village, Southampton Village do not have sewer districts. And the density and then the water quality. And I don't even know the empirical evidence behind this, but that's what we are told. Oh no, you could never put apartments up there because they don't have a sewer district and the groundwater can't absorb the waste. Well, I'm still looking for that factual information to show us that. And then with our CPF funds now going towards water quality, well, we really need to look at putting in smaller, not monolithic, but smaller waste treatment systems in our villages and in our more dense areas that will allow us to do that. But the codes are prohibitive of it because generations and generations of our forefathers have created these codes that don't allow it. Even the change of the accessory apartment legislation in Southampton moved accessory apartments down from 3/4 of an acre to 1/2 an acre. There's very few 1/2 acre parcels where you can walk to any kind of business district. So we need to keep ratcheting that down, and it's a wild, crazy, convoluted series of challenges that we face, but it's only going to be faced if we have the will to face it and support the people who need to change the codes, update the codes, be brave about getting, meeting today's needs.
Thanks, Michael. Eleni?
Yeah, hi, I'm Eleni Prieston, and I'm here on behalf of SEE, which is the Our East End network that represents cognitively impaired, and it's a percentage of the population we don't speak about very often or recognize as needing affordable housing. So, do I have questions? I have always had a question about the campus at Southampton, which is supposedly going to be inhabited someday in the distant future, very, 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 very distant future, and the dorms that sit there empty and why they can't be used, especially if that was one day going to be a great marriage between the cognitively disabled and Stony Brook Medical at some point, and under what circumstance would that ever be possible? There are 16 rooms, and of course they need renovation and a kitchen, and there's housing for staff in each of those buildings, so 2 would be sufficient. But anyways, it's an issue, it should be addressed, and also the 60 units going up on Route 114, I'm wondering, or anywhere, is there ever a percentage of those accommodations for disabled? Not physically so much so as cognitively impaired. And we have a growing population that can't be denied anymore. We're easily 100, easily. Thanks.
So the project in Amagansett does have a preference, there's a disability preference. So rather than reserve certain apartments or units and designate that physical space, there's in the selection process for the wait list for tenancy, a leg up is given to any disabilities. That's not just physical, it's not just mobility impaired. I also am a big supporter of an IGHL type home where you might have a large house, say it's got 6 bedrooms with a maid's quarters, including. So that becomes a live-in nurse opportunity, and you can have 4 or 5 adults who want to live independently. Independence is a moving target. So you don't certainly not to put them in a large facility or warehouse them. They should be in a home, and it should feel like a family. It should feel like a home, but it's an alternative to them staying in their own family home and living with their parents for the
And
duration.
they all have services provided through East End Disabilities and organizations like that. So they come
Absolutely.
with staff and they come with, they need.
And it has to be
need
licensed,
together.
and it has to, they have to have the resources and the credentials.
Well, we used to have that. They used to be called board and care facilities. They used to be called board and care facilities. And you have to take into consideration the growing number of children who are no longer children, who have autism, and they're functional adults now. But they need what Katie's talking about and what this lady was talking about. They need some level of supervision. And I think your idea is great, Katie. I endorse it.
Thank you, Fred.
Yeah, I wanted to address certainly the part of this about the campus, Southampton campus, which I've been very involved with through the years. First of all, I want to dissuade people of the notion that somehow there's nothing going on at the campus, because there's a lot going on at the campus. There's, last year, it's become more of a graduate center. There's 600 students that took classes at that campus last year. The Marine Sciences program, the Fine Arts program, and there's been a growing number of graduate programs related to health sciences there, which are going to continue to grow. Of course, the hospital has the lease and is looking to build a new facility on the campus, which I would say, shovels in the ground. They have to raise the money. They've got to get the permits. We're probably looking about 5 years out. 4 of the dorms are being utilized now as part of the school, but there are clearly opportunities with the remaining dorms that are left, and that is one of the things as far as what potential housing opportunities are presented by those parts of the campus that aren't being utilized, particularly with graduate students there. There's less a demand for residential facilities for students that you would have with undergraduates. So I think your point is well taken, and that is there's an opportunity, I think, for the campus for those old dormitories that are not in use to be looked at as part of this. And it is something that I think is at least on the radar screen of Stony Brook University. The second thing related to the hospital is that when the hospital, and it'll be several years down the road, but when the hospital does move, that leaves the facility that is there now. And there's been talk about maybe that could be an assisted living facility similar to what Conic Landing is on the North Fork, or maybe some of the other options or things with housing for the disabled, things that we're talking about here today. So when we talk about that campus, also remember that there needs to be a reuse for the hospital building too, and we should be perhaps factoring that into the discussions that we're having about housing.
Thanks, Fred. Anthony, I know you had a question.
Hi, yes, Anthony from so I guess this is more of a comment. I just want to come closer to following up a little bit of what Susan was saying and some of the other folks on the panel, but just specific to here in Sag Harbor Village. I'm not talking about the unincorporated towns where I think it sounds like I think the government is sort of those towns are aware of kind of what these sort of zoning issues are and how to change them to help accessory apartments. But let's say you live here in Sag Harbor Village, you own a little house, you just want to build an accessory, a detached accessory structure, just rent it out as a year-round rental. You probably won't be able to do it just because of the zoning, the setbacks, the lot coverage, the pyramid law, all of that will just, you just will run out of room you won't have room on your property to do it. Even if you have if you're so fortunate to have an existing non-conforming grandfather, say a barn or a garage that's big enough to be converted, you still won't be able to do it. Because, just a couple of years ago, Sag Harbor Village changed its laws on accessory structures that now you're not even allowed to have plumbing in an accessory structure unless it's a pool house. So you have to have a pool, which is so it's kind of like I feel like the town is, the village is almost kind of shooting itself in the foot as far as it goes with accessory apartments, with just the rules and regulations, and I think they have to change. I think one good thing that does seem to be coming up in the village is that there's a rumor afoot that we may be expanding our sewer district, which is great because that'll take the whole need to accommodate a septic system, which is also very difficult on these small properties. We'll at least take that out of the picture. So as that's coming up and going through the village hearings and stuff, I would encourage everybody to support it for a lot of reasons.
Not to talk about your neighbors will complain if you put a small building on.
To the,
Jim? I'm sorry.
To the issue of accessory apartments in the village, it's something that's of concern for us on the Housing Trust. We realize that however good the intention of the code is, it's ineffectual. I think since they've done it, there have been 2 legal conversions of illegal apartments. And we're not sure there's been any addition of accessory apartments in the construction standpoint of addition to the house. So we've only had 2 conversions in the time that's been in place. So how do we change the equation? We're looking at the possibility of making a contribution, a pretty significant contribution, to the creation of an accessory apartment. It would depend maybe on the amount based upon whether it was an illegal that you were converting to an illegal apartment, or you were creating one from whole cloth. The other thing is that the towns have affordable housing overlay. Well, the village doesn't. And I think there's an opportunity for us to recognize that we can change the density, and then basically an R20 town. We don't have a lot of multifamily here. We can modestly change the density. It's some R20 lots, and maybe have 4 affordable units on a lot, and we can make those either rental or some kind of condo situation or co-housing situation. But we have to look hard at both the intent of the code as well as the willingness to follow through to make it effective.
Thanks, Rob. We got a question here.
Thanks. So my name's John Barton. I lived here my whole life. When Sag Harbor was the cheap, dirty place to now it's a multi-million-dollar place. I think to base your main effort at projects that take 10 years to get done and being highly identifiable as there's the 37-unit development going on that we can fight, and it's organized kind of target. I think the government should be more focused on a more spread out approach and putting motivation in each existing homeowner's pocket to where you motivate them more to create more affordable housing. And I think that comes in the form of the most understandable language, which is money. And giving tax incentives for affordable housing, property tax incentives, maybe funded by the CBF or something. But I think that as soon as you identify targets in the community, they're going to be attacked. And also, when you spread out the affordable units around the towns, you're creating more relationships between the homeowner and the accessory apartment tenant. And the community is about relationships. And if we have thousands of relationships, if we're spawning thousands of relationships spread out in the whole South Fork, that's a much more sustainable, stronger solution than the 37 units in Amagansett that when you drive by, you can say, that's where all the affordable housing is. And A, you don't want to live near there, or you don't want to invest near there, or there's a problem with that in some way. So I think that the understandable approach is to physically create solutions by constructing affordable housing. But I think when the town takes it on, you're creating more cross purposes and more resistance in the community, easily identifiable resistance. I'd like to thank you guys for approaching a thankless task. And the Community Preservation Fund, preserving community, including the lower income people in your community is a way to keep it more real. And I think that we're surrounded by unreality in this community. And when you have to live next to, or you want to live next to the interesting guy who is a Mason, that's a nice way to live when you're more of an esoteric kind of career, whatever. But don't make yourself such a target. Spread it out and give everybody an incentive to be part of the solution instead of just the government. That's my
The town decided to attempt this accessory apartment legislation because that spreads it out. It's owner occupied, so the owner has a vested interest in making sure that tenant is behaving properly and maintaining their property properly. The issue sometimes, and this is where Fred's legislation might help, or wherever we can get the extra funding, is people that would like to do it but don't have the money to put an extension on their home or revamp the inside. So I've already had conversations with Bridgehampton National Bank, and they're wonderful. And they said if the people have enough equity, they would lower their rates to give the person a little incentive. But with Fred's legislation, if something like that passes, then we could lend money or a low interest loan with, 0.5% interest or something to be able to do that type of renovation so that it's spread out throughout the town with those people that are willing to put an extension on. I think seniors, it's a wonderful thing to be able to have extra income when you're in the years that, you're not making money. So that is exactly why the town attempted this
I think the benefits have to be overwhelming to clearly communicate the value of making an affordable apartment. I know that a small credit towards your yearly income is nice, but people don't really understand that until it's exciting. They need an exciting number or an exciting story that they can easily identify as a value to move forward with creating an affordable.
So we'll leave that up to the community to do, okay?
I want to say something about this.
Sure,
I've been trying to accessorize an apartment for 4 years. I've been in court 7 times, 7 nice house. I'm a neighbor.
We didn't hear
That
you.
apartment was there for a lot longer than those guys over there, even know about. But anyway, I've been trying to accessorize an apartment for 4 years. Just to legalize it, just to be legal. I didn't really have to do anything because it's been rented for a long time. I felt like a criminal after spending close to $20,000 on things I didn't need. Town water, I loved my well, it didn't smell like Clorox. Inspection of my septic, which turned out to be fine, but that was after attorneys, after engineers, after the long real reality of the encouragement that supposedly just makes me feel as though they're just trying to kick up, business for 20 other people. I've been providing a really nice rental for local workers for a long time, and it's been fine. I just wanted to say it's not quite a peachy, quick thing that you can bring to pass.
Which is why you need to go to town board meetings, village board meetings,
Unless you have other issues on your plate.
and tell people that we need to make this more simple. You need to speak up at meetings. You need to demand it. You need to be mad as hell and not take it anymore.
Thanks, Michael.
Can I mention, in response to this gentleman's question, or addressing the group and saying it needs to be beneficial and there need to be tax incentives. If there's a list of incentives of say 15 or 20, fee rebates, tax abatement, ability to get your septic system put in at no charge, and it's very simple, I think that you would see a huge number of people in Sag Harbor want to utilize or legalize their accessory apartments. But it's a checklist, and it has to be available to everybody. It's not, you pick out what works for you, and then you go and do it. And places have done this all over the country, and they provide these long lists, and the politicians will say, well, pick one or two things and we'll offer it. You don't, it's a menu. You offer all of it, and you'll get some affordable housing, in my opinion.
Yes.
Thank you, Susan. We have another question over here.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say this has been incredible. It's one of the first sessions I've attended, and the panelists are great, and even my seatmates here have taught me a lot. I'm a newly elected trustee in the village of Southampton, and we really struggle with this. My sons, age 23 and 24, have told me they don't want to come back and live here because they don't have a friend group. And that's pretty alarming. We are partnering with Diana Weir and the town have been great partners to us with regards to looking at accessory structures. I love your idea, Mr. Calvert, on reverting the use back to previous multifamily. It seems like it could be quick and fast. When you're in government, government's very slow. I came from the private sector and it was like this. And sorry, no offense, but it just takes a long time. we really want to do something quickly. So I have a question to all of you as to what could be done that has the biggest benefit in the near term. And then I have one other comment to make, which is, yes, community is about relationships, and I heard, gentlemen, you had mentioned something about the Southampton Village Code having a plumbing, arcade.
I was talking about Sag Harbor, actually.
Oh, Sag Harbor, I was gonna say, I've read that code front and backwards, and I don't remember that, but.
Yeah, no, Sag Harbor.
Okay, appreciate that, but we do have village envy with Sag Harbor, because we have heard you have scores of apartments available, and that's leading to your vibrancy. So if anyone from your end would be a partner with me so I could understand that more and bring those findings back to us, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Kate?
With regard to if there was one thing that we could do that would make the biggest impact, I have to say the momentum is our best ally in getting these things done. There isn't a silver bullet. There's not one giant pot of money or one type of housing or one piece of legislation that will solve this problem more quickly than what we're trying to do now. The most important thing is we do have the political will at the moment in the, on the municipal, county, and state level. We have to seize the day. We have momentum. We have to keep going. We have a term, I think I heard Diana use it earlier in the talk, the pipeline. That pipeline is not so much like a water or gas pipeline where things flow and are regulated. It's more like a surfing pipeline where the water is on top, it's coming, and you go up and down and back, and you back off a little bit and you speed up, and it's that type of pipeline. So it's kind of a roller coaster sort of pipeline. We all have projects in the pipeline. We have to focus simultaneously on the future. What we've already started, we have to get that done so that we just roll right into the next one. So momentum is my best answer to that question.
Fred, you have something to add?
Yeah, first of all, I want to reiterate and agree with the fact that there is no silver bullet. I think all of these things are about trying to put as many tools in the toolbox as you can, because depending on the situation, where you are, what community it is, what township you're in, some things are going to work and some things aren't going to work. The main thing is to have as many of those tools in the toolbox as you possibly can, and a lot of them have been mentioned here today. One of the things that has been indirectly focused upon, but would be good to have somebody from the Suffolk County Health Department at one of these things too, because I don't know how many times, with a project where it comes down to the fact, well, the sanitary code, if you don't have a sewer district, which Sag Harbor does have, but, there's a reason why West Hampton Beach and Southampton Village and Montauk, they're all looking, Riverhead has a sewer district, but why they're looking at least sewer districts for the downtown, because, there is a situation, the West Hampton Beach Library, they built a new library and they couldn't use part of their upstairs because they didn't have enough sewage credits for it. They had to go buy them. And so the health department is a big part of this discussion, because that, even more so than local zoning, sometimes it is the health department regulations that have an impact on this. And then with accessory apartments, I wish Southampton luck with their new law. There have been, I don't know how many efforts and attempts at accessory apartment laws and apartments over stores, and if you get past the health department and all that. But what everybody here has said today is pretty much true. What happens is people just decide that it's easier to take your chances and do it illegally, because number one, the cost and the time that you have to put in to try to get approvals for an accessory apartment, and then the assessor comes and reassesses your property because now you have an accessory apartment. So I think the key there is you have to make it easy, and wherever you go, you get pushed by other parts of the community who don't want to see these in their neighborhood, or don't want or raise environmental issues about increased density. So, trying to find that balance where you can make it work in a way that people are willing to come out and do it, and they actually see a benefit to doing it that way, as opposed to just going on the fly and hoping, you don't even, better to ask forgiveness than to ask permission. Really, the rule for accessory apartments.
That's right.
Thanks, Fred.
I think that, we do have to proceed and take an approach that's very broad. There is no one solution. I think we all agree on that. And we need to keep developing new solutions. And we need to keep putting projects out there and getting them built. But the one thing we haven't talked about today, which I think keeps me up awake at night, is the fact that as we are pushing forward with more units coming online, we are losing affordable properties at an alarming rate in East Hampton, and I know it's happening, in Sag Harbor and elsewhere. We see neighborhoods that have traditionally been low-income neighborhoods, streets that had very modest homes where working people could afford to live all over. The lanes in Amagansett at one time were rather modest homes. Now they're, multi-million-dollar homes. We see neighborhoods that literally were, completely overlooked and frowned upon for anybody who was investing in real estate. Now they're being bought up at an alarming rate. Huge houses are being built, tiny little cottages are being torn down. So we're losing units faster than I think we could possibly build them, and that's the other thing that, if there is one way to approach this problem to help, it's to put as many new units as you can out there and try and figure out a way to stop the bleeding from the other end.
So it's not an immediate silver bullet, but it's just a scale of what I think we need to do. Everything I said or suggested was a choice for us as a community. We're going to lose a ton, and we're going to gain a few modestly, and what's going to be the net result? Probably a continued decline in affordability here. So it's going to take an intervention. It's not an incremental approach. One of the significant commitments to a resource that we have here, sorry, Peter, is the East Hampton Airport. It's 600 acres. Significant amount has already been cleared. You could build a very intentional community there.
That's right.
That is forever affordable, that is forever tailored to the workforce, local workforce, that is going to be, that's going to have net zero housing, that's going to produce its own energy, that's going to have incredible water saving opportunities. It's basically the model for how we have to live in a sensitive area in an affordable way for significant enough people to support a year-round population. That's the kind of scale of solution that's the
Peter, you want to respond to that?
I'm going to turn the mic off.
There's no greater joy than owning an airport.
First of all, you don't need to apologize. You know, we are looking all over town for opportunities, and you know that is an option at some point. And you know, we've struggled, you know, to try and control, dial back airport noise for generations, now, decades, and we've seen huge impacts from that. And I think, you know, really it comes down to values that our community has, and where you want to be going forward in the future, and we can remold our East End to whatever vision we see. And you know, when I hear you talk about molding it in a way that benefits our community and keeps our community intact, that's really what we're talking about here. So, you know, I think we have to look at all options.
Fred, I know you're working on the 0.5% for the affordable housing. When does the CPF sunset as it's currently?
2050.
2050?
Yeah.
50?
You and I will be having lunch at the American Hotel. The day it expired.
Have we reached a point where it might be more beneficial to use the majority of that money for affordable housing rather than open space?
Well, people ask that question, and you know, the fact of the matter is between the land that's already been acquired, that the town has to pay the debt service on for a long time to come, completing the open space plans, the farmland plans, historic preservation, now water quality. You know, in Southampton, some of it goes for payments in lieu of taxes in the Pine Barrens. Funding has to go for the management of these properties also in some cases. It's not like there's money lying around. So that was why we took the approach of adding 0.5%, raising the exemption, because indirectly, but not directly, that's what you're doing, because you're providing additional money for affordable housing, but you're also giving some sort of relief at the lower end of the real estate market, which is money that would have otherwise gone to the Community Preservation Fund. But we're doing it through an exemption, not asking the voters, would you rather make a choice between water quality or affordable housing, which I think is not a choice that we should be asking people to make. So, you know, adding 0.5%, increasing the exemption to at least 400,000, I think accomplishes the same thing without, you know, trying, you know, one of the reasons why we increased the fund to 2050 for water quality was it was evident that we needed resources for water quality. The whole purpose of, one of the purposes of land preservation was that if we preserve the land, it would also protect the water, but the legacy of development, water quality was still declining. By extending it to 2050 was a way of maintaining money for open space preservation and not having to take it away for water quality. So I don't think it's a viable strategy to take away from one to the other, but rather, you know, again, by utilizing the extra 0.5% and then raising that exemption, you know, technically you are taking some money away from the land acquisition program, because that exemption is people aren't going to be paying as much in the way of tax for that program. But I think that's a much better way to do it. because I think people understand why you're increasing the exemption. It hasn't been increased in 20 years. It will result in some loss of revenue to the Community Preservation Fund, but it's reasonable to do it that way. So I think that's a better approach than suddenly saying and asking the voters, well, do you feel like taking money away from land preservation and water quality for affordable housing? Because I think that's a very divisive battle to have in this community, and I think it's better to segregate a separate funding source and a reasonable approach for housing than suddenly make this the Hunger Games for how the money gets used from the transfer tax.
Thanks. Eric?
Hi, I'm Eric Cohen. I live here in the unincorporated part of Sag Harbor in Southampton town. And I'm a Democrat, and so it goes without saying I'm in favor of government regulations. And this is all great, everything I've heard, but it's almost exclusively been a discussion of what government can do. And we do live in a free market economy, and I'm wondering what it is that we can do, if anything, it might be a naive question, to encourage the private sector to get more involved in affordable housing. And I have one idea, and I'll throw that out, and then you can comment on my idea as well as answer my question, which is expand the zoning where multi-use development is allowed. Because I think if we could do that, we would also create vibrant neighborhoods for senior citizens and others, but we would also make it economically feasible for developers to build things, where they can make a good return on their investment. Thank you.
I just wanted to let you know, there is a provision in the law for Long Island that was passed by the State Assembly and Senate in 2008, and it's called the Long Island Workforce Housing Act. And that requires that every developer that builds 5 or more units must build 10% of them affordable. And that's what's called inclusionary zoning. We had none of it over 10 years because there was no building. The banks weren't giving loans, the economy was devastated, we had a foreclosure crisis, which is finally tailing out, but we didn't see development. Right now in the town of Southampton, we probably have 5 developments that will be each including affordability for 10 units. In return for that, the developer gets a little density bonus. Some developers, I have a developer that's offered to build 15 affordable apartments on his own because he wants to maintain them. So you do have this type of give and take. One of the senior projects in Hampton Bays, the developer offered 30% of the units affordable, 50 units, he's building 15%. So that is going on right now, whether they like it or not, the developer has to do that. So that's a lot of these units. There are going to be 4 in Watermill, 15 in Hampton Bays, there's some in Bridgehampton. And the town is looking at changing its code because all the CPF properties that we purchase now, we are stripping the development rights. So we're not waiting to build a sewage treatment plant in downtown Hampton Bays or in Bridgehampton. So if a developer, a private developer wants to put apartments over stores, we will transfer those credits to allow them that capacity. So the town is already working, at least Southampton, to use those transfer rights or sewage credits to be able to put these stores with apartments overhead. We're looking at every development in the town that has a second story that's just for show. And we're trying to incentivize the developers to do something. So there is that going on right now. We're trying everything.
I've got one idea for funding that's private. And I'm gonna get this wrong in some part because I'm not a tax lawyer. But foundations can loan money at a low interest rate. For example, let's say market is 4. They can loan money at, say, 2, and they get to count the other 2 as a grant. And there are consortiums of foundations that have joined forces and actually done this for affordable housing. There are not many of them. But it's one thing that the private sector can do is to help all these terrific people on this panel that are actually involved in building. They could join together and give low interest rate loans, which would facilitate the supply source.
Thanks, Susan. Kate?
Also, the property at 531 Montauk Highway appraised at $6 million. The Housing Authority picked it up for $3.415, and the seller took a tax deduction, a donation on the decreased sale price. So there are mechanisms.
Thanks. We have time for one more question. We have a question.
Never mind the airport, stuff like
I
that.
know we have no opportunity zones out this far out east. Oh, we have no opportunity zones out here. Is there any way that the government can initiate that? I know it takes forever, but is it something that we could consider in the future? Because the opportunity zones are the ones that will incentivize private developers. They're very popular in larger density areas, but not here.
I think the opportunity zone that is the closest to us is actually Riverhead. But we lobbied very hard for the other side of the river, the Flanders, Riverside, Northampton area, and that was an interesting process involved with the federal government and the governor's office. That didn't happen, but suffice it to say that if there's ever a second round of nominations that occur with these opportunity zones, I'll let Peter speak for East Hampton, but I know because I was involved with Southampton when they were trying to get that the last time. We certainly would try to be aggressive in getting it.
No, because somebody mentioned that the private that's one way to incentivize your private developers rather than depending on.
What's an opportunity zone?
What's an opportunity?
An opportunity zone is an area designated either by legislation or a legislative body or the governor or the federal tax code, where if you're a developer, you will get tax rebates or tax credits like they do with the low-income housing tax credits. It's all about the taxes, it's all about the money, but if you get that designation, you're allowed to use it. There are economic opportunity zones, there are foreign trade zones, so it has to be done at the legislative level with tax incentives. That's what allows the developer to want to build.
And to be clear, it's federal, not state.
Yeah, it's federal, so it is the federal tax code, just like.
Federal tax credit.
Yeah, and even the low-income tax credit housing opportunities, they're managed through the state process, but it is a federal tax relief program. So we tried to get Flanders and Riverside, and we said, it's one zip code. We share a fire department, we share a school district, so it's, just because there's a town line there, really the community is one community, but we lost. But we'll try again next time. Fred was wonderful. His office is always great. I'm Oak Executive. Thank you, Fred.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for coming today. We're going to wrap this up. Thank you again to our panel. I'm going to pass this over to Gavin, and we have a great session coming up in 2 weeks. I hope I'll see you there.
Thank you.